Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with me this afternoon. So as mentioned, I'm Deputy Director in the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. I lead a policy team. So my day job is in the policy world, so I'm not an HR specialist. But I was asked by the department to develop our approach and to do something to help tackle bullying, harassment and discrimination. So that's in addition to the day job. It's alongside the sort of policy job. So with that in mind, what I'm going to talk about is actually, I'll take you through MHCLG's sort of position around bullying, harassment and discrimination, and then what that led me to in terms of setting something up that's new. And so I'll then actually describe what that is in terms of the Fair Treatment Service and what I think makes it different actually to what I've seen elsewhere, what we've done in addition, and then some data on what impact that's had in the organisation and where we're taking it next. By way of introduction though, I actually want to start with a short video. It's quite late in the afternoon and I think it always wakes us up a bit, which I think really brings home why fair treatment matters. It's a demonstration that's through a bit of an experiment with some rather lovely Carpathian monkeys. And I think they speak for themselves, as you will see.
There's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food than you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task, and we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Oh, I think those little monkeys say it all and are probably reacting in the way that we would all want to if we let ourselves loose. But I think if we then translate that back to say, actually, how does that relate to people? There is research as well that really demonstrates just quite how significant fair treatment can be and potential impacts can be on people. So the other piece of complementary research I just want to raise is the impact that's been demonstrated as a result of social rejection on IQ. So if I ask you that question, how much do you think social rejection impacts IQ? Just ask yourself, do you think it's A, 6 to 8%, B, 10 to 12%, C, 13 to 25%, or D, 30 to 45%? Anyone brave? A, B, C, or D? C. It's C, up to 25%. I mean, that's huge, actually, when you think about the impact on people's capability and ability to operate in the workplace, which I think is just an illustration of why, actually, I was asked to take on this role alongside my job. Because actually, when we go to the data in our department, actually, we're not doing badly when you look at us compared to the other major departments. In our survey scores on bullying, harassment and discrimination, we're actually lower than the civil service average. But actually, is that enough? And actually, no, it's not in comparison to the significance of this for our staff. What I've also done as well, actually, as part of this role, though, is I've done analysis on that people survey and looked at it and the breakdown by division. And I've done that over a period of years in terms of designing this service. And every single year, what that has shown is the level of hotspots that there are in the organisation. Those numbers of divisions actually where you've got a spike in terms of both bullying, harassment and discrimination. So, for example, last year, there were a couple of divisions where actually the scores were over 30%, one was about 45%. There were a higher number, some 6, where it's over 20%. And then if you include in our civil service people scores, I prefer not to say because we have that box in our scores, actually that opens it out quite significantly. And I always ask that question, well, why has somebody said they prefer not to say rather than no? So even if that's kind of not a robust question, actually that suggests there's something to look at in those divisions. But what we've also got when we look at the survey scores is actually there are some zeros there. There are 5 to 6% of teams in our last year's survey where there are no reports of bullying and harassment or discrimination. So that says it's possible. If you can do it in those divisions, actually you can do it in other teams across the organisation. So we wanted to do more. And that's what led to thinking about the design of the Fair Treatment Ambassadors Service. And what I wanted was actually to be generating a staff-led service so that actually staff were going to be helping other staff in the way I went about it. So my first starting point was quite brave, actually. I did a personal blog about an experience I had had, and I had no idea how that was going to land. But it really resonated with people. It really brought home the extent actually to which this matters, as we've seen by our monkeys. And I had a fantastic response in terms of seeking volunteers from that blog. And what that meant I was able to do in terms of people who were willing to step forward and become ambassadors is actually it meant I could run a selective process. Actually, everyone applied effectively and filled in an application form to become a volunteer. And I could select people both on their level of evident commitment, the passion that they had for tackling this, as well as a sort of demonstration of clear competencies in becoming an ambassador in the organisation. We then got those selected ambassadors professionally trained, so we got ACAS in to do that in terms of the sort of awareness of the law and coaching skills. And alongside it, worked with HR to say, actually, if I'm going to launch a new service that's going to bring a spotlight on this, we need to be solid and on solid ground as an organisation in terms of the HR policies and actually what's there, and that they're fresh and they're up to date and they're committed to. So we refreshed that in parallel with HR. And then as a result of that, therefore, I was actually able to launch the Fair Treatment Ambassadors Service. The first strand of that service is drawing on this suite of selected ambassadors, and in my department we have just over 20 in terms of the size of the department, to offer one-to-one support from members of staff who think they might have been subject to bullying, harassment or discrimination. In actually advertising those ambassadors, it was really important through the selection that I had selected people from a range of grades, across the organisation geographically, and actually as far as we could from different networks. So there was a diversity in the ambassadors that we were able to select. What I also ensured they committed to do was actually have their names and telephone numbers up. So they needed to sign up to some certain things when they became ambassadors, so that actually anyone coming to choose the service chooses who they go and see, and nobody else knows. It could be somebody in their division because actually they want to speak to somebody close to them. Actually, they could want to go and talk to somebody in a completely different part of the organisation because that's what makes them feel more comfortable. They get to choose because all those names are advertised and freely advertised, so it gives the power to the person choosing the service. And the principle there, in terms of that one-to-one service, is actually if you make it accessible, if you make it at staff level, if you make it peer-to-peer support, actually it's a really easy, sensitive conversation. It's about giving people access to something and some support from their colleagues, from their peers that they've chosen, which allow them to test something. They might not even be sure, but actually they can test whether something's bullying, harassment or discrimination and be empowered to do something about it and therefore actually nip it in the bud before it goes further, before you've got something that has become more entrenched and more difficult to deal with, and therefore actually before it's more likely to become a grievance issue or a union issue, which is far more damaging to that individual and far more damaging to the organisation as well in terms of the consequences. So what the ambassadors do is they signpost options. They're fully kitted out in terms of what the department offers. They know all of the things that sit behind it in terms of employee assistance schemes, union support, grievances. They make no attachment to them, but they can signpost them. They've been trained in active listening as part of the ACAS training, and they remain confidential discussions. Whilst I do monitoring and look at trends, I have no idea who has access to one-to-one support, even though I'm leading the service. And maintaining that integrity of confidentiality is absolutely essential in terms of what we do. And what the ambassadors don't do is they don't judge, they don't make decisions for the people who they are supporting. And they don't tell anyone. They provide that reassurance that they're not going to tell anyone that person's name, unless actually it's hit a legal situation where they're actually worried and concerned for that person in terms of breaching sort of serious misconduct issues. We've never had to do it. That's the only circumstance in which that would change. And the ambassadors are clear about that. The second strand, which was really, really important actually in terms of setting up the service, and linked to this question of hotspots, is that we set up training. We set up workplace training. And it was the ambassadors themselves, once we selected them, that actually designed that training with me and my partner. So they were staff-created sessions that drew on the ACAS training, drew on every bit of resource, to be honest, that we could find in terms of what works and training on bullying, harassment and discrimination. And they created sort of bite-sized workshops that the ambassadors themselves lead within the organisation. First of all, I went out and targeted conversations with the hotspots behind the scenes so that nobody knew, but it meant that actually when I spoke to those divisions where you had a spike, actually I had something to offer them in a really positive way that wasn't a kind of haranguing, wasn't in any way embarrassing, but actually said, I can help you. We've got something here, we've got an offer to change the tenor of the conversation within your team. That's a positive, constructive offer from the department. But it's gone beyond that. So we've targeted the hotspots, but actually, of course, it's available to any division and team that wants to take it up in the organisation. And those workshops, you know, they cover the basics in terms of awareness of the law. But what I also really, really like about them is it then takes it into an interactive session that's a qualitative session around some of the grey, some of the actually what is bullying, harassment and discrimination, and there's kind of their workshop style. And then it also takes it into actually what support we've got in the organisation. So it's a natural way of advertising and giving confidence to the one-to-one support for the ambassadors at a team working level led by the ambassadors. And it also actually takes you to a conversation about what culture you want within your team. So it leads to some pledges at the end on the part of the participants and the teams that undertake it. And they come away with a series of pledges in terms of what they want to do. What it doesn't do is it doesn't suggest at a team level and at a staff level that we're moving away from or being soft in terms of wanting to be a high-performing organisation. So that's the qualitative part of the discussion. It takes it into that grey area, and it takes it into a discussion of actually we're an ambitious organisation. We want high quality management. We want high quality performance. What is that? What does that look like in terms of firm and fair management? And when does that tip over? And actually, what are some of the subtleties? And to ask ourselves as leaders when that tips over. So what do I think makes this different as a service? What I think in terms of what I've seen and what I drew on to design it that led to sort of a level, I think, of kind of qualitative difference actually in terms of what we're offering and actually what we're really proud of is the positive focus first of all. We very, very purposefully talked about this as a fair treatment ambassador service. So the name takes you to the outcome that we want to achieve. It's voluntary. So effectively, you could say it's a network, but actually it's also selective. There's a qualitative element that we're ensuring in terms of the support that we're giving to staff on an issue that actually really matters. We brought the professional training in. So actually the ambassadors have really got something in terms of that professional training, but we've got a kind of confidence in terms of the service that they're providing. And we've taken a really comprehensive approach in that we had terms of reference that they needed to sign up to, commitments that they were making as ambassadors, and we had that launch alongside the whole policy refresh, the departmental policy refresh. And I think that the element that really has made such an instrumental difference as well is that targeted training, and the fact that we've got an offer that both promotes the service but actually means we can address what was probably the most significant message from the staff survey, which is that there's hotspots where this happens, actually. There's particular divisions where this conversation happens more than others. And it was so valuable for us to have this last year. I mean, as an organisation, we went through being the principal department dealing with Grenfell. And you can imagine the pressure and the stress that that put under our organisation, and therefore the stress that those teams were dealing with in terms of dealing with the aftermath of Grenfell. And then we had something, actually, that effectively went into all of the Grenfell teams that we could use, actually, to support those Grenfell teams in terms of establishing some ways of working when they've been set up under an enormous amount of pressure and stress. We do have an executive team sponsor now. We didn't when I started. But that's one of the things that has now really supported in embedding it within the organisation, given its profile. And then there is this real qualitative element that I think I certainly know I get, and the service gets actually, about working in partnership with, but being independent from HR. So I really can capitalise on actually the support from HR in terms of ensuring we've got the quality of service that sits behind. But I'm also challenged to HR as well in terms of saying, have we got a sufficient signposting service? And the ambassadors are a challenge to HR in terms of whether they feel able to actually offer the kind of support or think we've got enough of the kind of support in the organisation that we should have. And we monitor that on an ongoing basis. That's another element of it. So every quarter we are monitoring the trends. I get no data about people's names. I can't track it back, but we're looking at whether there are any trends there. We're looking at actually what the nature of cases are. We're looking at how many there are and feeding that back into HR. So that's actually helping with the development of our policy. Take-up has been phenomenal in the organisation. As an organisation that was less than 1,400 people, that means half the staff actually have been through workshops, and that's staff-led workshops with a kind of initial outlay from ACAS of some £2,500. So that's a phenomenal take-up. And coming out of the workshops, every single one has actually led to delivering pledges and comments, so led to a cultural change. And then finally, I think we get that information back from that one-to-one support that's given. And this was one comment that was made, and it was a sort of unsolicited comment that one of the ambassadors sent to me that they'd been given, which is, thanks to you, I'm able to look back on my time in MHCLG with pride at the way I conducted myself in challenging circumstances. You really did an exceptional job. And that's a comment that's come back from somebody who received the one-to-one support as a result of the backing that they were given. It has led to some really, really significant consequences in our staff survey as well. So last year we saw a 7% increase in the number of people who reported bullying, harassment and discrimination, which I think is probably one of the biggest tests, and a 5% increase in those who felt it had been resolved satisfactorily as well.
Louise, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great, so again...